are you or your child soon taking the SSAT to try to apply to a private school? If so, in this video, I'm going to talk about where to start in your SSAT prep to make sure that you can get the score that you need to get into that school you are applying to. If you're wondering who I am, my name is Brooke. I've been an independent college consultant and test prep coach for over a decade and a half. I've scored perfectly on the SAT and the ACT. I've coached students to perfect scores on the SAT and the ACT, and also top scores, 99th percentile scores on the SSAT. Additionally, I have a couple of prep courses for the SAT and the ACT. You can find those at SupertutorTV.com. I've also written a couple of math books, so you can check those out on Amazon.com. And I hope that you'll join us and subscribe to our channel, because if you're applying to private school for middle school or high school, you're probably also eventually applying to college, and that's what most of our videos here are about, how to best position yourself for getting into the awesome college of your dreams. First of all, in terms of introducing the SSAT to you, a few things that you need to know when getting started. First of all, make sure you know what level you or your child is going to be taking. There's several levels of the SSAT, and the way SSAT divides their levels is different from how ISE does. So if you happen to be taking both tests, please don't get confused and know that you might be one level on one test and another level on the other test because of the way it divides out. To break it down for you guys, elementary is students who are currently in 3rd or 4th grade and are entering 4th or 5th grade. Please note that my video here is going to be mostly focused on middle and upper level, because that's what most students are taking and where most of the resources are available. You're not going to find as many resources for elementary. It's a little bit harder to prep for. And it also is only a paper test. You can't take it at home or at a Prometric center. Middle level means you're currently in 5th through 7th grade. Typically, you're applying then for 6th through 8th grade. And upper level means you're currently in 8th through 11th grade and you're applying for grades 9 through 12. That's the breakdown. So know which particular level of test that you're going to be taking, because that's going to influence what materials you purchase, what practice tests you take, all that kind of good stuff. So just make sure you look at whether it's the grade that you're in or the grade that you're entering. Make sure that you dice that out and you're careful about it. Next thing is that the SSAT is a little bit more flexible than the ISE. So if you're considering taking one or the other because the school you're applying to will take either, know that the SSAT will allow you to take it more times than the ISE generally will, and in a shorter time frame. You can take the at-home test up to 5 times, which is great. And I don't think any student really needs to take this thing more than 5 times. You can also take it twice at a Prometric center or as an alternative. So now that we've gotten kind of the details out of the way, let's talk about how do you begin your prep. We're right now in 2020. So for the 2020-2021 season for the SSAT, SSAT is really emphasizing this testing at home option. And that means that what I would recommend for prep is going to be different for this particular season than it would be for a lot of other seasons of prep. And that's because when you're prepping from a computer, the best way to practice is typically on a computer, at least for the practice test part. You can certainly prep for all of the skills you need on paper, but when it comes to practice tests, if you can take official practice tests that are computerized, that's going to be your best option. SSAT has released 4 official practice tests, but you have to pay for them. They're available on their website, and you can either get a physical paper book shipped to you, or you can use their online module, which costs around $70 at the time of this video's release. I would recommend that you guys go ahead and get the online module, and I would not recommend that you buy both, even though I think they have a package where you can buy both, because the tests in the book are redundant to the tests on the online materials. In any case, the first step to prep is take a practice test, see where you're at, and figure out what you want to improve on and what your goals are. You can either take one of those online tests, or you can start with a paper test or a test from a book to just kind of gauge where you're at if you want to save those online tests for when you're closer to the test or when you've at least built up your skills and you feel like you're more ready for it, and that's perfectly legitimate. There's multiple sections on the test, and I'm just going to talk through things to be aware of as you review your practice test in each. First, the verbal section includes both synonyms and analogies. Most of the time when students aren't scoring where they want to in this section, their number one task is to memorize vocabulary. I have some tips on how to best do that in our mnemonics video, which you can also check out on our channel. But in any case, sometimes the best way to do this is get some old-fashioned flashcards and get a really nice word list. You can get a lot of word lists in SSAT prep guides or from any of the books that you happen to purchase. Also note that analogies are a skill in and of themselves, so be sure that you understand the way to best approach those analogies. There are certainly hacks and tricks to that, so I recommend that you get a tutor or you take a class, or you at least get a prep book that goes over how to approach analogies effectively, and you practice some analogies before you take the exam. Also, like I said, your practice test result is going to tell you in what area do you need to focus the most. Are you worse at analogies? Are you worse at synonyms? Comparatively, where are you fumbling the most, and what do you need to focus the most time on? The next section of the SSAT that I'd like to talk about is the math section. The math section on the SSAT is sort of like a watered down version of the SAT according to whatever grade level you are at. So sometimes they're going to have kind of tricky questions, other times they will be more straightforward, but in any case, you're going to be required to have a certain level of math skills. Remember that this is a multi-grade level test, so sometimes you're going to be tested on things that you might not have learned yet. So it's really important that you identify, are there any types of questions on your practice test that you don't know how to do yet? And if so, you've got to make sure that you get enough practice questions of the same style in front of you before test day. Next up is reading. You want to make sure that you have good principles of reading behind you. The other thing to know is this is a very text-based exam. So going back to the passage over and over again is going to be your best tactic here. And make sure that you're approaching this as an open book test and not the same way you approach school. And also, just something in general that you need to work on is your overall reading comprehension skills and how do you approach multiple choice tests, how do you use process of elimination, all those kinds of things. Again, if you're self-studying, a book can help you with that, or a tutor or a class or whatever it is. The other thing that I'll say again, and this is true for the ISCE as well, if you happen to be prepping for the upper level SSAT, there's quite a bit of overlap with this test and the skills that you need for the SAT or the ACT. The tests are by no means identical, but I would say the SSAT tends to be easier than both those other tests. So if you're an overachiever or you know you have to prep for those other tests as well, it might be good for you to prep for the SAT or the ACT first or in conjunction with the SSAT and be doing most of your practice exercises when it comes to reading comprehension or mathematics on the SAT, and then doing some practice tests on the SSAT rather than the SAT to ensure that there aren't any little holes or random kinds of problems that you also need to know how to do. And if so, then you can brush up on those as well. Remember though that SAT and ACT reading aren't going to cover the verbal section. So that's something you definitely need to cover on your own specifically for this exam. For middle and lower level, SAT and ACT are going to be way overkill and they're not going to be at the right level. So just stick with books that are on your level and you're going to be in better shape. Finally, there's an unscored essay that goes with the exam. That's going to be forwarded to all of the institutions to which you are applying. Check with those institutions specifically to see how much that matters and whether you should be making an effort, and if so, what they're looking for. In any case, you want to make a list of everything you missed on your practice test and make sure that you have a specific lesson that teaches you everything you need to know about that topic so you're up to speed and aren't missing any content you need to get a great score. Finally, working on all this stuff. So how are you going to work on it? Well, my best advice is if you're not taking a course and if you're not hiring a tutor from a particular company that has a set curriculum and you're hiring an independent tutor, the next step is usually to order some books and get materials together. While it's true that the official test makers for this particular test have quite a few official tests and official practice sections, which are great resources, you also are going to want to learn how to tackle those particular sections. And the test makers are not necessarily the best givers of advice for how to crack their own test. For that, I recommend that you turn to other voices like independent tutors who've written books or other brands that have books out there. Remember that when you're buying books, I'll give you a few warnings. Be really careful when you're ordering them. If you're a parent, don't just hop on Amazon and start shoveling books that say SSAT into your cart. They won't all necessarily work for your student. SSAT books are often divided according to level. If it just says SSAT on the cover, it very well may just be for upper level and not at all for elementary level, for example, or middle level even. Other books are going to cover all three levels at once. And what that means is portions of that book are not going to apply to you or your child. So be aware, it might look really thick, it might look really intimidating, but most of the time, my students who are prepping for the SSAT need to buy multiple books because only maybe 1/6 or 1/3 of that book is going to apply to you in your prep. Now, depending on how many practice tests you want to take, you also should take that into account. Most of those thick books only have one practice test at your level. So if you're taking middle level SSAT, there may only be one middle level SSAT book in a giant book that's this chubby, and you're like, how can that be? Now, granted, if you're buying the official materials for practice tests, that's going to be a good source of practice tests, and you might be able to get away with only 1 or 2 books, but just be aware that a lot in that book isn't going to apply to you. I also recommend that you use multiple brands because inevitably, unless it's official material, there's going to be some bias in the mix. So I like to mix up my prep a little bit and get the voices from a few different people in there to make sure that my practice is balanced. Like I said though, a pivotal element of your prep should be the practice tests that are official. And what I usually do with my students is we take a practice test, we diagnose what areas we need to work on, and then we go to the other kind of brands of books and we work on all that stuff, right? Whatever it is you need to learn, you go and you learn it, and then you come back and you take another practice test, right? So that's generally the cycle of learning that I use as a private tutor. Take a practice test, diagnose your weaknesses, work on those over here, then come back and take another practice test. I hope you guys found this video helpful. If so, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet. Thanks so much for watching and good luck on your SSAT.